Mondragon is got 260 cooperative enterprises related to it. Not all of them are part of its core group, but there's other independent cooperatives, like farmers cooperatives and different things in the area that relate to it, that are allied to it. But the core group are, at present, is 120 different factories. And the average size of these runs about 400 workers. Some of them are in, like Fagur has several different divisions, and there's a total of about 8,000 workers in Fagur. But the main thing to remember is that every one of these 120 co-ops are completely worker-owned. One worker, one vote, one share. The workers elect the governing council of the cooperative. It meets at least once a year, sometimes more often. At present, they're the governing council then picks and hires a management team and names a CEO. The CEOs and the management team can be removed from their positions, but a worker cannot be fired. Once you're in Mondragon, you're there. I think there are only 3 people who have been fired in the entire 50 years, and they were for major embezzlement was the crime. So that you can be kicked out for something like that, but otherwise they don't get fired. If you're a new hire who come in where for a 6-month period, you get to know them, they get to know you, those people can be laid off. So that's sort of a cushion in times of crisis. You can lay off the new hires. But the regular guys you can't lay off. They can share amongst themselves. We'll get into that later. They're presently the 7th largest business group in Spain, and 14 billion euros in sales. What if they need to downsize?
Yeah.
A firm will downsize, but it takes the extra workers. They'll take them over to another co-op that needs to upsize. And they'll share around among the different 120 co-ops. But you can't be fired. The kinds of cooperatives in these 120, 87 of them are industrial. You saw some of the pictures of it. They make all kinds of stuff from, washing machines to very high-tech automated equipment to make solar panels and things like that. Credit, there's only one, but don't be misled. That's Caja Laboral. It's their worker-owned bank. It's actually 40% owned by the workers who work in the bank, the tellers, the managers, and so on. And the other 60% is owned by the other cooperatives, the other industrial cooperatives. So it's called a second-degree co-op. A second-degree co-op is a co-op set up to serve the other co-ops. So the bank was set up to serve the other co-ops. So every co-op owns a piece of the bank plus the workers in it. The other ones that are like that are like the medical center, the Mondragon University, and so on. Or second-degree co-ops. Consumer co-op is Eroski, the supermarkets you saw. At one point, they bought up all these mom-and-pop stores, made this huge chain, Eroski, converting it to consumer and worker-owned. Their main aim was to keep out Walmart, which they did. But they have you go into an Eroski store, here's an example. It's like going into a low-cost Whole Foods. That's completely worker and consumer. They're very cool. Agricultural, they have a few places where they do interesting things. They raise rabbits, for instance, for food. Education, Mondragon University itself has 5,000 students, but the other 7 are what we would call think tanks, R&D, research and development centers. Some of them to develop certain businesses for a certain sector. One of them I visited was to develop entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs. Research and services. Services mean like a lot, because technically speaking, a worker and the 1,000 workers are not considered by Spanish law workers because they are also owners. So a lot of the benefits of the Spanish safety net did not apply to them. Things like Social Security or medical care, so on. So they had to set up their own. So they set up their own social safety net where you get your pension, your Social Security, your health care and everything through the services second-degree co-ops. Now, since then, the law has changed, and they are not allowed to get some of the Spanish benefits, but they still maintain these as a kind of, wearing a belt and suspenders at the same time, you could say. They're mainly centered in the Basque Country, Euskadi. They're an oppressed nationality within Spain. Franco tried to do to them what we tried to do to Indian kids. You were punished if you spoke your own language. This is one factory. They're situated in this beautiful, you think you're in Vail, Colorado, to see the surroundings. But it reminds me of a lot where I'm in western Pennsylvania, where you have the rivers and the valleys. And in those valleys are one little town after another, and each one is a huge, for the town, a rather large industry and mill. And so that's what these are here. These are mills. This is Fagur. And it's the major manufacturer of appliances, and the fifth largest in Europe. And as I said before, 6,000 worker owners in Fagur. The Basque Country was the center of resistance to Franco during the Spanish Civil War, and they suffered greatly. That's the classic, the bombing of Guernica that Pablo Picasso immortalized. Franco and the whole place was basically devastated in the early 1940s. At that time, you can't tell the story of Mondragon without telling the story of the man whose vision and who's the founder of it, which is Father Jose Maria Arizmendi Arrieta. People call him Father Arizmendi for short. There's a picture of him up there when he was a soldier. He fought with the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. He was damn near executed, and just by an administrative error escaped being executed by Franco. He was assigned to the Mondragon Valley, which is not far from where he was born, by his church, to go there, and the previous priest had been executed by the Franco, and his job was to reorganize the parish. So like most priests, what's the first thing you do? You organize a school. And to organize a school, he went around to, he was a great organizer. He went around to local Basques, farmers, and who had little bits of money hidden away, and convinced them to pool it into a very small credit union and to help fund his school. And the school was a very practical, technical school to teach young people. And he made a point of having the girls in it from the very beginning. The girls were never a majority, but he always made a point of having girls in it from the beginning. And this was the first, classroom. This was his graduating class, first one. He picked 5 of the best students and created a little company called Ugor. And this was their product, first product, little kerosene stove. It doesn't look like much, but it was desperately needed at that time in the Basque Country. Ran on kerosene, one burner, you could cook on it, it would heat your house. It survived and just expanded. What started as Ugor is that 6,000 worker firm Fagur. I showed you before, it's now grown immensely. And the little credit union eventually became Caja Laboral, which now has like 4.2 billion euros in assets and hundreds of offices all over Spain, 1.2 million depositors. But this was the first factory where they made the little stove. So that was the beginning. So the secret to Mondragon's success is that it's a 3-in-1 combination of factory, school, and credit union. And this is what makes it different from a lot of other cooperative ventures. You have to have these 3 combined. The factory alone will lack the ongoing sources of credit that a normal business needs to survive. In the United States, I think New businesses are created all the time, I think, but the average is that 75% of them fail within the first year or two. And one of the reasons they fail is because of lack of access to credit. They're undercapitalized. From Arizmendi's point of view, they also needed a source of innovation and skills. And this is why he wanted the worker-owned school along with the worker-owned credit union. Okay. Mondragon University, this is the lobby of just one of the hundreds of offices of Caja Laboral for banks. This is the most important core contribution that Arizmendi gave to Mondragon. You can sort of think of these like the AA 12 steps. They're not quite chiseled in stone, but it comes pretty close. There's a little wiggle room around the edges, but people to this day stick to these 10 principles. The first principle is open admission. That means anybody's eligible. You don't have to be a Basque. You can be a Spaniard or an Italian or French. Doesn't matter what nationality you are, men or women. You can be a Catholic or a non-Catholic or a non-believer. In other words, non-discrimination. Democratic organization. Everybody has one share and one vote. Nobody has more shares or any votes than the other. And you meet, and that's how you vote. That's how the decisions are made. Sovereignty of labor. I'll go into this more later. But sovereignty of labor means labor has the final say. And capital is a tool of labor, not the other way around. Self-management. That means not only managing the production line, but it means that when you do elect your leaders to your governing council, you don't just let them sink or swim, you also train them. So that's why they created all these training institutes at Mondragon University. Pay solidarity. It does not mean everybody gets paid equal. There is a pay spread from low to high based on skill, seniority, things like that. Originally it was 1 to 3. Now it's 1 to 4.5 on the average. By contrast, in the United States, it's 1 to 350 is the range from the lowest paid new hire to the top CEO. So they do have a degree of wage hierarchy, but they consider that it's narrow enough that they call it pay solidarity. Intercooperation. This means the co-ops help each other. Say my co-op, I'm making toasters, but I don't have enough orders for toasters to keep everybody going. But the co-op down the street is making hubcaps, and it needs more workers. So we shift, and we help each other out. We shift workers around. That's how they weathered the current last crisis without having to lay anybody off. They shifted workers around to different co-ops. This is an example of they have one big Congress they go every year. And the things they vote on are fairly important. They vote on things like what the pay spreads are, what the product strategy for product line development is, and most importantly, they elect new leaders. You're required to attend. They have about 75% attendance rate for these things. The first time you miss, you get a warning. If you miss a second time, you get fined. So they really encourage worker participation.
Now this is at each plant.
At each plant and in general, both.
But
each plant has its own general assembly, and then
they representatives of those plants that then go to the
go to both of the big ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's both participatory on the local plant level and representative, and certainly representative, and when you get into the overall spread. Social transformation. This is Father Arizmendi saying it's not enough for you to just try to build some kind of perfect world inside Mondragon. We're not interested in that. We're interested in transforming society. So you have a broader mission. Universal solidarity, the same thing. You're not only to have practice solidarity amongst yourself, you're supposed to have solidarity with other workers. Finally, education. which is kind of a bland way of putting what Father Arizmendi had in mind. Arizmendi saw this not so much as a new economic institution. He saw this as an economic foundation for a kind of consciousness-raising engine for transforming the world. Sovereignty of labor. This is a very interesting one because, well, here's the way he explained it. The maximum authority of the conventional company is capital and the instrument is labor. Here, the co-ops, labor's in charge, capital. Some of the implications that come from that, we've already mentioned one worker, one vote. Here's the key point, I think. They produce surplus value in these factories. But the difference here is that the surplus value is entirely controlled by the workers who created it. Nobody else controls their surplus value. So that they can decide what to do with it, how much they want to keep for themselves, to pay themselves. They're required by Spanish law to give 10% to the local schools and community. But they can also decide whether to invest in new businesses, set up new co-ops, improve plant and equipment, put some aside for a rainy day. But they have complete control over their own surplus value. There's a relative egalitarian income spread. They maintain that. Generally speaking, the workers in Mondragon make about 50% higher than the average worker in similar in the areas. And then participation in decision making. They are actually very sophisticated about it. This is a model they gave us of those 10 values. You start with the core, education, starting with the school, just like Arizmendi did himself. And then if you're supposed to follow this out. Sovereignty of labor comes next. Then the instrumental labor of capital, democratic organization, open mission. And then you follow, and these ones face inward, and the outer ones, social transformation, intercooperation, universal, those are projected outward, the outer society. The theory behind Arizmendi. He was a great organizer as a young priest, but he was also very much of an intellectual. He did a study of Robert Owen, a utopian socialist. And this gets to the second secret of Mondragon's success. He found what he thought was the fatal error in Robert Owen's co-ops. In the Mondragon co-ops, a retiring worker's share, if you want to leave the co-op, you retire or you die, you can't sell your share to anyone. You can only cash out. The share remains with the co-op. See, in Robert Owen's co-op, so any worker could sell share to anyone. So what various finance capitalists would do, they would watch these co-ops, and whichever ones were being successful, they would buy up all the shares, and the other ones they would starve to death. So some would fail and be crushed. Others would thrive, but they would be taken over by finance capital. So Arizmendi built into the system that this wouldn't happen. So it prevents external stock buyers. This is what happened in Weirton Steel. When the workers there were in dire need of capital. Of course, they didn't have a Caja Laboral bank. They had to sell shares to raise the capital, and eventually the people who bought those shares took over and fired almost all of them.
What happens after they retire? They're still living in Mondragon, all right?
They still live there. They still live in the area. But when you retire, in addition to your pension, your share is worth something money-wise, probably about anywhere from $35,000 to $100,000. So they'll give you, depending on which firm you're in. So they'll give you the cash. In addition to having your pension, you'll get the cash value of your share when you leave.
And so does the new worker that comes in to replace it, he gets a share for free?
No, they have to buy it. I think it's around 3,000 euros.
I see.
And if you don't have
the discount to the equity value that was cashed out.
Right. And so they will lend in fact, if the worker doesn't have the money to buy into it, they will lend him the money to buy in and deduct it. Everyone has the same share. So the basic structure is headed by the General Assembly, which is made up of worker delegates, and a governing council, which is made up of selected from the General Assembly. It selects an executive board, which hires a general manager, and then each department has a manager that also works together with the general manager. You have accounting auditors, that's mainly from Caja Laboral, the bank, to make sure there's no hanky-panky with the money. You have a social council. This serves as a kind of trade union. This is where both managers and workers bring their day-to-day complaints. It's not enough to wait for the end of the year to raise your issues, so this thing meets on a daily level. There's Mikael, our guide, the teacher who taught us, first thing he told us when we get there, is just first thing I want you to know, this is not paradise and we are not angels. So there is class struggle and battles that go on inside Mondragon co-ops. Okay, and the management council, it'll take managers from each division, it'll form its own management council. Here's another way of looking at it. These are different divisions. Here's the financial division, that's the banks over here, Mondragon University and the schools, the Roski and all the retail over here. And the industrial group is further broken down to automotive, industrial construction, and so on. Part of these changes have come recently because they've had to grow so much, they've grown so much. This gives you an idea of the amount of money we're talking about. Retail sales, 8.4 billion euros. The industrial sales, 5.5 billion. Here's how the workforce is divided up: manufacturing, finance, knowledge, retail. Of these 48,000 retail workers, these are not yet fully integrated, because when they bought up these co-ops, they were consumer-owned. So they are gradually, step by step, I think they're about halfway through the process of converting the workers who work for them into full-fledged worker owners of them. So there's a process of change involved.
On the finance side, how big is that? It's 3% of the workforce, but how big is it in terms of the dollar?
They have a lot of money. They're cash rich at the moment.
And is that contribution to their, whatever it was, 14 billion euros or 17 billion dollars, whatever, what's their contribution there? Is it a billion or is it 3 billion? What's their contribution there? The asset base is pretty different.
I don't know it off the top of my head. I just know the general figure that they hold 4.2 billion euros in assets, and I think 18 million in cash reserves at the moment. So they took a big hit during the crisis. They lost 100 million in Lehman Brothers. Okay. They were holding $100 million worth of Lehman Brothers paper, which, what they're like, what Caja Laboral is like is if you're in town, if you have a relatively, say your trade union has a relatively successful savings and loan, that's a credit union based savings and loan, where you go to borrow money for your car, you go to borrow money to your house, or you have a small business shop, you want to set up a beauty shop or something like that, you need a loan. That's what their local.
So they're the Bailey Building and Loan as opposed to Banco Santander being Mr. Potter.
Except they're owned by the workers themselves. So any of the profit that's made from everybody's mortgages goes back into the workers themselves. We had a special intense workshop on precisely that point, innovation. One of the top leaders of Mondragon ran it for us. And here's what he told us. He said, look, Fagor, we make all these great appliances. They're very high quality. You can only buy them in high quality department stores in the U.S. I said, are we going to be able to make these things forever? No. China is going to make them. He said, we can compete for a while. We can make little change. We can improve quality a little more around the edges, but it's a mature business. We can maybe cut down what the worker owners get a little bit. He said, but in the end, there's no way we're going to compete with China or Turkey or India in making these things. They're going to come up and make these things just as good or not better than us. They're going to do it for less. So what do we do? So I asked this guy, I said, okay, if Fagor's going to go down the tubes, what's your future? He said, what we are focusing on and why we have all these think tanks is the businesses for us in the future. We'll eventually get out of making toasters and ovens and such. We're going to focus on photovoltaics, green energy, biotech, and health technology. They consider those the high value-added growth industries that they would focus on in the future.
This is a major issue in any business. What do you do when you have a mature business and usually the management wait too long, they're cashing out and everybody else gets screwed.
Right.
So that's just a given. So do they have they demonstrated that they've done this before, that they've
Yes.
been able to move their assets, meaning human
Yes.
capital, into other business lines as they catch a rising star.
Exactly.
They have demonstrated that.
Exactly. That's exactly what they do.
So they know
That's why they have those.
skills that
That's
they
why they
need.
have those 8 R&D
Right.
centers.
The management skills are very different from what a normal capital.
Right. First of all, the manager is also an owner, and he knows that all the other workers are owners, and he knows he's not going to be able to shut it down
Right.
and take his money and go buy something up in Malaysia. He's stuck there.
Right.
Have there ever been cases of a co-op just going out of business and then being totally?
In the 50 years they've been, 3 co-ops have gone out of business.
And then all those workers just get redeployed?
They got reabsorbed into others, but they had 3 co-ops failed. 3 or maybe 4. There's less than 6 out of the 120 failed. That's compared out of 75% business failure rate in the U.S.
So what's life like in society in general? Like, is there a guarantee of full employment? Are the products, bagor and whatnot, are they just sold in the market in the Basque region?
No, they're sold all over Europe. You can buy them in the U.S., some of them. There is some unemployment. Like I said, they have the new hires, the 15%. And if a new hire comes in and all of a sudden there's a financial crunch, the new hires are out the window. But once you get but there's never been more than, in the height of the financial crisis about a year ago, there were 0 new hires. They laid them all off. But they didn't lay off a single worker owner.
And unemployment in Spain is 20%.
Right, but right now, things are picking up a little bit, so now they're starting to bring in a few more new hires.
Do they adjust the working hours from 8 to 6 or?
They can do that, or they make people work on other things, or they send them to school. So here's the final point. There's my friend Mikhail. I've already told you my favorite quote from him. This is not paradise and we are not angels. Mondragon has flaws. It has class struggle. There have been firms that have broken away from Mondragon. There was one strike once by about 8 young Maoist workers went on strike. They all got kicked out. Eventually they brought them back in. They made him stay out for 3 years. Anyway, but here's my favorite quote from Father Esmond. Knowledge is power, but knowledge must be socialized so power can be democratized.